just watching it, especially on the big screen, is so powerful. I mean, this movie takes you through all of it, humor, but my goodness, it just hits you in the gut. And we were talking outside. You haven't seen it for a while.
Yeah, I just had this profound moment where it's interesting when you make a film and you see it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. The things that really you're thinking like a director, but you're not thinking like a human sometimes. Not that directors aren't human, but maybe sometimes they aren't. But that moment when he says, I say, you never talk about your pain, and he says, I'm in a tremendous amount of pain. And I just, it made me cry tonight. I was just so moved. And just this guy who wants to not let this thing crush him. And I identify with that in my own life. So it was amazing. It's interesting how it takes some time away. We premiered in Sundance in January. So it took this much time for me to actually see it in that way.
Tell me about preparing for the interviews, because someone who now and again I will interview people, and I'm fortunate to, but you ask some very candid questions, and I think it's really, in those circumstances is really very challenging, because you want to get beneath the surface and you don't want to fall into easy tropes.
Yeah.
With him. So how did you, you asked about him feeling pain. You asked questions that one might imagine happening in perhaps a therapist's office, for instance.
Yeah. The more I interview, the more I just feel like it's my job to think about what the audience would want to hear. And my wife and I watch movies and we're like, they're not telling me everything, and they didn't really answer that question. And so I want to. I feel like that's my job, and to sort of. I'm not really after information as I am about trying to get to penetrate through something, whatever that is. And he is the best ever. I mean, he there's some documentary filmmakers here, and there's always this challenge of, are they going to tell me everything? And, are they hiding something, or are they pulling something back, or are they telling me something that's a little bit off of what really happened? And Michael was just like an open book. I've never encountered it. Yeah, maybe it's his Parkinson's, but he was just like, when I called him and I said, do you want to do this movie? He said, yeah, absolutely. I can't, and he was that way. He was just open. And so that was, the gift was really him. And so we could just talk about anything. And he and I were just like two friends talking, and me pushing him a little further than he wanted to go. But,
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the pleasures of the movie is seeing that extraordinary comedic timing of his. I'm not sure there's anyone better or even at that level, maybe a few people. It is absolutely extraordinary. But in a way, his comedic timing and charm can be a bit of a deflector shield.
Yeah.
In a sense.
I think that's right. And before I start a movie, I always start with like a question. And before we shot a frame, I was like, what happens when an incurable optimist confronts something that is designed to defeat that optimism? And so I think for a lot of the movie, and we put that in the movie, there's a running and running and running. He's running as a kid. He's running away from what his parents want. He's running from Parkinson's for a long time, and then suddenly it turns and he stops running. And that deflector thing is a real thing, and he does deflect, and he deflects because I think he really wants to be this guy who's on top of it and can carry it and is not going to be defeated, and yet he doesn't always win.
Yeah, maybe the fact that he was so picked on, or if he wasn't so damn charming, would have been picked on a lot more as a kid. It's like, I don't want to be the victim, and I want to have some power. When you're that short compared to all your
That's right.
classmates, you're at a deficit potentially, certainly.
Yeah, we talked about him running away from bullies in school and how Parkinson sort of became that bully in a certain way. And that he finds this coping mechanism to kind of deal with it. And humor was that thing that got him out of everything, you know.
Yeah. At 6 minutes and 35 seconds into the film, approximately,
Uh-oh.
I didn't get it down to the frame, a very important moment happens.
Uh-oh.
And I talked with Michael Hart.
Is this
the
a gotcha
editor.
moment?
Oh, no, it's
Okay.
not. Well, I mean, no, it's a fantastic moment.
Okay.
This is where he falls in New York.
Yeah.
He's on the street.
Yeah.
And Michael explained why that moment was so important and why at the premiere in particular you were really like,
Yeah.
this is a key moment. Can you explain?
Michael Hart said this.
Michael Hart said that to me.
Well, the tone of this movie is very delicate, and we knew that there are a lot of films before us that talk about people with disabilities, and Michael J. Fox's books are about not wanting to be pitied, and his interviews are about not wanting to be pitied, not wanting to be seen as this person with a disability, and that the component of humor was a very big part of it. And so there's a line before that which sort of sets it up, which is, you know, he's brushing his teeth. He gets out of bed and his feet are cramped the way they are often, and he's brushing his teeth and his hand is shaking. And I asked him this question: is this the sad sack story of a guy who gets a disability and it crushes him? And he says, no, that's boring. Mm-hmm. And then he walks to work and then he falls. And the question for us is, could the audience understand that this is not that movie that they think they're going to see, a movie that's pitying someone? Because we didn't want the audience to pity him.
And I guess what I was getting at is he falls over, and clearly the person he's just, you know, I love you and all that sort of thing. And then with this perfect timing says, oh, you really knocked me off my feet.
Yeah.
Boom. It allows the audience to laugh.
We were waiting at Sundance and waiting, and everyone, I'm sorry I didn't answer your question properly.
No,
but it was a very big laugh. And I was like, oh, we have them now. And that was a great feeling. Because you just don't know.
Yeah.
You just don't know. And we had never shown it. And this was in Eccles at Sundance with like 1,300 people. And we were just like, what? And what's going to happen here? So.
This is not a gotcha question, but I wanted to ask about casting
Yeah.
the movie, because you've got to find a Michael J. Fox or someone who is more or less looks like him. But you also had to find a Robert Redford.
Right.
Because you notice, like, there's a reference to Ordinary People. This image of Robert Redford flossing while Michael J. Fox is doing his audition is hilarious. You know Redford, so you know. I guess
I was terrified that we wouldn't get into Sundance because Robert Redford started Sundance and the movie kind of goes after him. But we realized right away that you couldn't have anyone play Michael J. Fox, and that so this wonderful actor Danny Azari was we basically cast someone who kind of walked like him, but Michael Hart, who's the editor of this movie, did an incredible job, and we'd never worked together. And we had this battle. And sometimes when you work, you're like, screw this guy. I'm like, this is so hard. But we had this battle, which was every day. And he was like, I would storyboard the reenactments, and then he was in England, so I would put them in, and then I'd go to bed and I'd come back and he would recut the scene without the reenactment storyboards and put in movies like from Secret of My Success or Bright Lights Big City, and I go, what do you? And then I would recut it and use some of that, and so it was this battle between how do you portray him in this moment in his life when you don't have footage of him, and Michael Hart found this way that I could never have imagined, which was the full example of that is the sequence we call Moonlighting, where he's doing Family Ties and Back to the Future, and it's going back and forth, but it's using some reenactments, which we shot in Vancouver, and scenes from Back to the Future and Bright Lights, Big City, and Secret of My Success, and Family Ties, and it's all sort of intercut very wildly in a way that neither of us imagined would happen, that would not have happened if we hadn't had that battle.
Well, it's brilliantly, I mean, that works so incredibly well. It's so seamless. I mean, at some level, you're maybe registering some of the images where they come from, but I love the way in which you're using, or you and Michael Hart, the editor, are often using clips as B-roll, because they're like this guy commenting almost on his own life without realizing that, you know, when he was making those films, obviously that was the last thing on his mind.
Well, it's lucky in the sense that the time we were portraying him was a time when he did a lot of movies. Mm-hmm. And so there's this scene where Gary David Goldberg gives him the script for Back to the Future. And of course I had storyboarded it as a reenactment and with an actor, and I came in one morning and he had put this scene from Secret of My Success where he's talking to someone completely different, and it's just shots of Michael J. Fox talking to no one. But you just imagine that Gary David Goldberg's there. And so Michael Hart deserves a lot of credit for doing things that I didn't know you could do in a documentary.
Now we're going to open it up for questions in a little bit, so I've got to maybe take a couple of those in a minute. But your daughter Stella is in the credits as a production assistant. Perhaps she could have been included as a co-editor or assistant editor, because she gave an important note to you.
So we were locking picture. You know, that for the filmmakers here, you know what this feels like, where you're finally just saying, okay, this is it. And we really felt like we had the timing right and everything right. And we screened it one last time with my two daughters and Michael Hart. And we were looking at it, and my daughter Stella was like, Dad, you know that shot of him, Michael, where he's just looking straight into the camera? Just this long, long stare. We'd had it somewhere else, and we'd taken it out. And he goes, you know, that's you just put that at the end. He goes, that's you know, he's just so beautifully still there, and you should just try that. And we put it in. It was like, done, movie's over. And at that moment we came up with the title, Still, because that stillness that last shot has.
I wanted to ask about the title, and yeah, that makes perfect sense. Obviously, the title plays on.
I thought it was a terrible title when it came up. I was like calling Apple, and I was like, I think it's Still, guys. And it wasn't like, I'm so excited, I'm going to sell you on this. I was like, it's kind of a passive, quiet, kind of not like go out and see this movie title, but it just something about it felt right, you know.
I think it's perfect because he's still Michael J. Fox, but also stillness. I mean, that's certainly thematically is key to it, and that at this life where he has found an inner stillness of a sort, he physically he cannot be still. But anyway, that's my comment on it. I think it's a great title. But okay, questions. I can't see too well. Oh, I do see one now.
How long did it take you to edit it? Because it's so fantastically edited.
How long did it take to edit?
I wish I could remember. It was a very long time. And the intercutting between his past story and waking up in Florida, and then his current story, which is his life now, and there were all these different events. Like while we were shooting that, he went to the hospital like 5 different times from falls and stuff, and that getting that right. There were most of the time when you cut back and forth, it didn't work. And so that just took a really long time. And thankfully we had a lot of time to just do it and screen it and do it. And we storyboarded all the reenactments. And so we had a pretty tight movie for a long time while we're editing. And then we went and shot it and brought those back. But we had a very healthy amount of editing time. I'm so bad at dates. You think I would know? I don't know. The whole thing was like 2.5 years. Yeah, it takes a long time. Yeah.
Yes.
How did this project come about? Like, did it come to you or did you come to him? Was
How-
there any differences, disagreement on how you want to push the story, or what was that process like?
So the other thing I was thinking as I watched it, and really it's like I'd had some distance. I don't think I've seen the movie all the way through for maybe 4 or 5 months, and I kind of felt tonight like this movie saved me. I was. It was during COVID, and I can now say, at the time I didn't know it, but I can now say that I was deeply depressed. Like Trump was president, COVID was driving, my kids were leaving, I'm getting older, I felt like my best films were behind me. And I picked up his book. There was an article in the New York Times, and he wrote this scene where he had this terrible fall. And he wrote about it in such a charming way. And I was like, oh, I just read it for me. Sometimes the best movies are when you're attracted to the idea before you think it could be a movie. And I read it, then I said, I got to read all his books. And then I called him. I called his agent, and then I called him, and then he was like, let's do it. So it was so easy. It's never that easy. And he just said, let's do it. And we didn't have any disagreements, really. I'm trying to think. I had Final Cut, and I showed him the movie twice, which I always do anyway, and he loved it. And it's funny, there was a scene where after he becomes a big movie star, and he's done Back to the Future, he's got the number 1 and number 2 movie of the summer. He's like a mega star, and he comes back to Family Ties. And there's this footage of him being an asshole, basically. He's bossing the crew around and everything. And I was like, oh no, he's gonna hate this. And he goes, and then after the first screening, he was like, that footage? I'm like, here it comes. I don't know. And he goes, where'd you find that? I was like, well, I found it. He goes, that's fantastic. I was such an asshole. And that says something about him, doesn't it? Like that he. And that's not always the case. A lot of people, in this era of people making movies about famous people, they want to still sort of steer their legacy in a certain way. And I don't think I know he didn't want to. So.
We have time for one more. Yes.
Was there anything about his childhood, interviewing him on and off, that he didn't want talked about, like off limits, parents, siblings, anything deep about his childhood he didn't want to really speak about or was difficult?
No. Whether any of his childhood stories.
Sorry, if you hadn't. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah,
jumping on your line. Yes, the question was about his Michael J. Fox's childhood. Was anything off limits in terms of asking about that?
No. And often there is. When they say off limits, sometimes you interview people, they don't tell you it's off limits, but they have a sort of squirrely way of not answering the question. And no. I really think that sometimes it's the timing you find people. I think he's in a moment where Parkinson's is really, it's really hard, and he's got real struggles, and so those matters of like, he doesn't mind looking like an asshole when he was a young 22-year-old, and he doesn't mind the fact that he was a delinquent kid in Canada. Mm-hmm. So
the childhood is what we form our beliefs. It's all about the childhood.
Yeah, that's right.
The film is nominated for 7 Emmys, more than any other film or series. The Emmy voting has actually happened. We don't know the results. The ceremony is supposed to happen in January. We'll see if that happens. And the film will also be part of the Oscar race. So congratulations.
Thank
on
you so
that.
much. Thanks.
Please thank you again to David Scugnard.
Thank you, Matt. This is very kind of you to do this. And thank you for coming and watching on the big screen. And thank you to the IDA. So.